In 1872, Cleveland, Ohio had 26 oil refineries. They were owned by 26 different men, independent businessmen who competed, who fought for customers, who believed in the free market. 90 days later, one man owned 25 of them. His name was John D. Rockefeller. He was 32 years old. And what he did in those 90 days wasn't just business. It was psychological warfare, executed with such precision that it created the blueprint for every corporate takeover, every hostile acquisition, every market consolidation for the next 150 years. Amazon uses it. Google uses it. Private equity firms use it. They all learned from Rockefeller. But here's what nobody teaches you. Rockefeller didn't win with better technology. He didn't win with cheaper prices. He didn't win with superior products. He won by understanding something that his competitors didn't understand: human psychology. Stay with me, because what Rockefeller discovered about fear, loss, and decision-making under pressure is still being used against you right now in 2025. Every corporate merger you read about, every small business crushed by a larger competitor, every time you feel like you have no choice but to accept a bad deal, you're experiencing the Rockefeller playbook. And once you see it, you'll never unsee it. This is the story of the Cleveland Massacre, the 90 days that changed American business forever, and the dark psychology that made it possible. John Davidson Rockefeller was born July 8, 1839, in Richford, New York. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, was a con man. He sold fake cancer cures, committed bigamy, and disappeared for months at a time. His mother, Eliza Davison, was a devout Baptist who raised her children with strict religious discipline. This combination, the con man's ruthlessness and the Baptist's moral certainty, would define everything Rockefeller became. He learned from his father that people make decisions based on emotion, not logic. That fear is more powerful than greed. That the appearance of legitimacy matters more than actual legitimacy. From his mother, he learned that discipline, patience, and unwavering conviction create success. That God rewards those who bring order to chaos. That monopoly isn't theft, it's moral, because it eliminates wasteful competition. Rockefeller genuinely believed that destroying his competitors was righteous. This wasn't hypocrisy, this was conviction, and conviction without doubt is the most dangerous force in business. In 1859, oil was discovered in Titusville, Pennsylvania. The oil rush began. Thousands of prospectors flooded western Pennsylvania to drill. Fortunes were made and lost overnight. It was chaos, pure chaos. Overproduction collapsed prices. Then shortages spiked them. Drillers went bankrupt. Speculators got rich. The market was a casino. Rockefeller was 20 years old, working as a bookkeeper in Cleveland. He watched the oil boom with fascination, but he saw something nobody else saw. The problem wasn't in the oil. The problem was in the refining. Crude oil straight from the ground is useless. It has to be refined into kerosene for lamps, into lubricants for machines, into fuel. And in 1863, refining was a mess. Hundreds of small refineries, all competing, all operating on thin margins, all one bad month away from bankruptcy. Rockefeller saw opportunity, not in drilling oil, that was gambling, but in refining it. That was a business. In 1863, Rockefeller invested $4,000 in his first oil refinery in Cleveland. Within 2 years, it was the largest refinery in Cleveland. But Cleveland had 26 refineries by 1870. Competition was brutal. Profit margins were razor thin. Most refineries operated at the edge of bankruptcy. constantly scrambling for crude oil, constantly fighting for customers, constantly losing money to competitors who undercut their prices by a penny per gallon. This is the moment when Rockefeller's genius emerged. Most businessmen saw competition as the problem. They tried to compete better, lower prices, improve quality, market harder. Rockefeller saw competition itself as the problem, and he decided to eliminate it, not by competing, by psychological domination. Here's what Rockefeller understood that his competitors didn't. Human beings don't make rational decisions. They make emotional decisions and then rationalize them afterward. When you offer someone a business deal, they don't calculate expected value, risk-adjusted returns, and opportunity cost. They feel fear, greed, pride, and loss. Then they invent logical reasons to justify whatever their emotions already decided. Rockefeller understood this at an intuitive level. He had watched his father manipulate people with fake cancer cures. He had seen desperate people pay money they didn't have for medicine that didn't work because hope is stronger than reason. If you can control someone's emotions, you can control their decisions. And in 1872, Rockefeller was about to prove it on a scale never seen before. Rockefeller approached each refinery owner personally. He didn't send lawyers, he didn't send managers. He went himself. He was calm, respectful, even friendly. He showed them his books. He demonstrated his costs. He proved that Standard Oil could refine kerosene for 15 cents per gallon while they were refining it for 25 cents. Then he made his offer. Sell your refinery to Standard Oil. I'll pay fair market value in cash. If you want, I'll hire you as a manager. You keep your income, you lose your risk, you gain access to Standard Oil's efficiencies. Everyone wins. Most owners refused immediately. Why? Because their refineries weren't just businesses. They were their identity. These men had built their refineries from nothing. They had taken risks, borrowed money, worked 16-hour days. Their refinery was proof they were successful, self-made, independent. Selling to Rockefeller felt like surrender. It felt like admitting they had lost. It felt like giving up their identity and becoming an employee. Pride. That was Rockefeller's first obstacle, and he knew exactly how to destroy it. That owner's territory, not to 20 cents, not to 15 cents, to 10 cents per gallon, below his own cost. He was losing money on every gallon sold. But here's what the refinery owners didn't understand. Rockefeller wasn't trying to make profit on kerosene. He was trying to make profit on their fear. The competing refinery owner watched his customers disappear overnight. Why would anyone pay 25 cents per gallon when Standard Oil sold the same kerosene for 10 cents? Within a week, the owner's revenue dropped by 80%. His suppliers still wanted payment. His employees still needed wages. His creditors still demanded loan payments, and Standard Oil's prices stayed at 10 cents. This is where psychology takes over. There's a principle in psychology called loss aversion. It was formally discovered by psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in the 1970s, but Rockefeller was using it in 1872. Loss aversion means that human beings feel the pain of losing something twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of gaining something. When Rockefeller offered to buy a refinery, the owner thought about what he would gain: cash, security, reduced stress, maybe a manager position with a steady salary. But gain is abstract. It's potential. It doesn't feel urgent. When Rockefeller launched a price war, the owner thought about what he would lose: his business, his income, his employees' jobs, his family's security, his reputation in Cleveland, his identity as a successful businessman. Loss is concrete. Loss is immediate. Loss feels like death. The refinery owner couldn't compete at 10 cents per gallon. He was losing money every single day. His savings were draining. His creditors were circling. His family was asking questions. Every morning he woke up and the loss was bigger. Every night he went to bed and the fear was stronger. Within weeks, the refinery owner was facing bankruptcy. Now, when Rockefeller came back with his offer, it wasn't an offer. It was a life raft. And he took it. But some refinery owners still refused. They were too proud. They had invested everything into their businesses, 20 years of their life, every dollar they had. They couldn't just walk away. This is where Rockefeller deployed his second psychological weapon, the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is the human tendency to continue investing in something because you've already invested so much, even when continuing is completely irrational. Gamblers do this. They've lost $1,000 at the poker table, so they bet another $500 trying to win it back. They're trying to justify the $1,000 they already lost instead of cutting their losses. Investors do this. They bought a stock at $100. It dropped to $50. They hold it, hoping to recover their loss, even when all evidence says it will drop to $25. Refinery owners did this. They had invested 20 years into their refineries. They had mortgaged their homes. They had borrowed from family. They had sacrificed everything. Walking away meant admitting that 20 years was wasted, that the sacrifices were for nothing, that they had failed. So they kept fighting, and Rockefeller let them. This is where Rockefeller's strategy intersects with what Machiavelli wrote 400 years earlier in The Prince. Machiavelli said that a prince must know when to be a lion and when to be a fox. The lion uses force. The fox uses cunning. The lion attacks directly. The fox waits and manipulates. Rockefeller was being a fox. He didn't need to destroy these refineries immediately. He just needed to outlast them. And he could outlast them because he had 3 advantages they didn't have. First, deeper pockets. Standard Oil was profitable. Rockefeller could lose money on price wars for months because he made it back on his other sales. Second, lower costs. Vertical integration meant Rockefeller's cost to produce kerosene was half what his competitors paid. He could sell below their cost and still break even. Third, no emotional attachment. The refinery owners were fighting for their identity. Rockefeller was executing a business strategy. Emotion versus calculation. Passion versus patience. There's no contest, so Rockefeller waited. Every week, the refinery owner bled more money. Every week, his debt grew larger. Every week, his options narrowed. The owner would take out loans at predatory interest rates. He would cut corners on quality, which lost him more customers. He would delay payments to suppliers, which destroyed his relationships. He was drowning, and every desperate move he made pushed him deeper underwater. All the while, Rockefeller waited. When a refinery owner was on the edge of bankruptcy, when he was drowning in debt, when he was losing customers daily, when his family was begging him to quit, that's when Rockefeller made his final offer. But here's the genius. The final offer was worse than the first offer. The first offer was fair market value. Maybe $50,000 for a refinery worth $50,000. The final offer was pennies on the dollar. Maybe $10,000 for the same refinery. Why would the owners accept? Because the alternative was total loss. If they declared bankruptcy, they would lose everything and still owe their creditors. The bank would seize the refinery. They would lose their home. They would be financially ruined. If they sold to Rockefeller for $10,000, at least they got something. They could pay off some debt. They could start over. This is called the anchoring effect in psychology. When you're making a decision, your brain anchors to the first number it sees and judges everything relative to that anchor. If I offer to sell you a watch for $10,000, then drop the price to $5,000, you think you're getting a deal. Even if the watch is only worth $500, the anchor was $10,000. So $5,000 looks like a bargain by comparison. Rockefeller did this with bankruptcy as the anchor. Once bankruptcy became the reference point, once total loss became the alternative, Rockefeller's lowball offer looked like salvation. The refinery owners convinced themselves they were making a smart decision. They were being pragmatic. They were cutting their losses. They weren't surrendering to Rockefeller. They were making the rational choice given the circumstances. But the circumstances were manufactured by Rockefeller. He created the price war. He forced them into debt. He made bankruptcy inevitable. And then he offered them a way out that benefited him. This is the dark psychology of negotiation. You don't negotiate from equal positions. You destroy the other person's position first, then negotiate from their ruins. In 90 days, Rockefeller acquired 25 of Cleveland's 26 refineries. He went from controlling 4% of American refining capacity to 25% in 3 months. He didn't use violence. He didn't break any laws. He didn't even use physical intimidation. He used psychology, loss aversion to create urgency, sunk cost fallacy to trap his competitors in losing positions, strategic patience to outlast them emotionally and financially, and anchoring to make his final offers seem reasonable by comparison to total loss. This was the Cleveland Massacre. And it was the blueprint. Rockefeller didn't stop in Cleveland. Over the next 8 years, he used the exact same playbook in New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, every major city with oil refineries. Approach the owner. Make a fair offer. If they refuse, launch a price war. Wait for them to bleed money. Make a low-ball offer when they're desperate. By 1880, Standard Oil controlled 90% of America's refining capacity. 90%. That's not a business. That's a monopoly. But here's what made Rockefeller different from other monopolists. He understood that monopolies face 2 existential threats. First, they're illegal, or they would become illegal. The Sherman Antitrust Act was passed in 1890 specifically to break up monopolies like Standard Oil. Second, they're hated. The public despised Rockefeller. Journalists called him a robber baron. Politicians called him a tyrant. Workers called him a ruthless destroyer of competition. Rockefeller needed a solution, and he found it in legal structure and public relations. In 1882, Rockefeller's lawyers created the Standard Oil Trust. Here's how it worked. Standard Oil of Ohio couldn't legally own companies in other states, but a trust could. A trust was a new legal entity. It held stock in multiple companies. The trust controlled the companies, and Rockefeller controlled the trust. 41 shareholders, all Rockefeller and his closest associates, controlled the trust. The trust controlled 41 companies across the country. On paper, these were separate companies. In reality, they all answered to Rockefeller. This was the first major corporate trust in American history, and it became the model for every trust that followed. Sugar Trust, Tobacco Trust, Steel Trust, all copied Rockefeller's structure. The trust allowed Rockefeller to control a nationwide monopoly while technically complying with state laws, but more importantly, it created a new legal entity, the holding company. The trust didn't produce anything. It didn't refine oil. It just owned other companies that refined oil. This structure would evolve into the modern corporation, the parent company that owns subsidiaries. Alphabet owns Google. Meta owns Facebook and Instagram. Amazon owns Whole Foods and AWS. Berkshire Hathaway owns Geco and Dairy Queen. They're all descendants of Rockefeller's trust. Let me show you how the Cleveland Massacre playbook is being used right now. Amazon uses it. When Amazon identifies a successful product sold by a third-party seller on its marketplace, it analyzes the sales data. Then, it creates an Amazon Basics version of the product. It prices it lower. It promotes it higher in search results. The third-party seller can't compete with Amazon's scale and logistics. Their sales drop. They either go out of business or accept that Amazon now dominates their product category. This is the Rockefeller price war. Legal, barely regulated, devastatingly effective. Private equity firms use it. They identify a fragmented industry: healthcare clinics, veterinary practices, dental offices. They buy one practice at fair market value. Then they use that practice to launch a price war against nearby competitors, drop prices, take losses for a year, force competitors to sell. Once they own 70% of practices in a region, they raise prices. Patients have no choice. The competition is gone. This is the Cleveland Massacre in slow motion. Google uses it with search. Google has 92% market share in search. That's higher than Standard Oil's peak of 91%. But Google isn't considered a monopoly because the service is free. You pay with data instead of money. Rockefeller would have loved this innovation. A monopoly so complete that users don't even realize they're paying. The reason the Rockefeller playbook still works 150 years later is because human psychology hasn't changed. People still feel loss more intensely than gain. People still fall for the sunk cost fallacy. People still make decisions based on fear and then rationalize them with logic. And corporations still understand this better than you do. Every time a small business gets crushed by a corporate competitor, it's the Cleveland Massacre. Every time a startup gets acquired for less than it's worth because it's running out of funding, it's the Cleveland Massacre. Every time you feel like you have no choice but to use Amazon, Google, or Facebook because the alternatives are inferior, you're experiencing the result of Rockefeller's psychological warfare. Competition has been eliminated. Not by regulation, not by law, by psychology. But Standard Oil isn't even Rockefeller's most enduring legacy. The real legacy is the psychology, the playbook, loss aversion, sunk cost manipulation, anchoring, strategic patience, price wars designed not to win customers, but to destroy competitors' will to fight. Every MBA student studies this. Every corporate strategist uses this. Every private equity firm executes this. Rockefeller didn't just build a monopoly. He built a system for building monopolies. And that system has been replicated in every major industry for 150 years. You cannot buy oil outside the descendants of Standard Oil. You cannot avoid Amazon's logistics network. You cannot opt out of Google's search monopoly. You cannot escape the pharmaceutical system shaped by Rockefeller's foundations. You live inside the system. And the system extracts wealth from you every single day, exactly as Rockefeller designed it to do in 1872. Here's the question nobody wants to ask. Was Rockefeller evil? Or was he just more honest about how power works? Every business wants to eliminate competition. Every corporation wants monopoly. They just don't say it out loud. Rockefeller said it. Competition is a sin. He meant it theologically. Competition is wasteful. It duplicates effort. It destroys capital. Consolidation is efficient. It serves consumers through lower prices. Before Standard Oil, kerosene cost 58 cents per gallon. After Standard Oil's efficiencies, 8 cents per gallon, an 86% price reduction. Was that exploitation, or was that efficiency? Both are true. Rockefeller built a system that delivered value to consumers while concentrating wealth at the top. You got cheap kerosene. He got $400 billion. And 150 years later, you still live in that trade-off. The most important thing to understand about the Rockefeller system is that it's designed to be invisible. You don't see the psychological manipulation. You see market forces. You don't see the price war. You see competitive pricing. You don't see the monopoly. You see efficiency and convenience. Amazon isn't crushing small businesses. It's providing fast shipping. Google isn't monopolizing search. It's offering a free service. Pharmaceutical companies aren't price gouging. They're funding research. The language changes. The tactics don't. So what do you do? How do you respond to a system you cannot escape? 3 options. 1. Accept it. Understand that consolidation is a feature of capitalism, not a bug. Use the efficiencies they provide. Buy from Amazon. Use Google. Accept that wealth will concentrate. 2. Resist it. Support antitrust enforcement. Buy from small businesses even when it costs more. Vote for politicians who promise to break up monopolies. 3. Understand it and position accordingly. If you cannot escape the system, benefit from it. Own stock in the companies that dominate. If the system extracts wealth from everyone and concentrates it in these companies, own these companies. This isn't investment advice. This is pattern recognition. The Rockefeller system has concentrated wealth for 150 years. It will continue because it's embedded in corporate law, tax code, and human psychology. John D. Rockefeller destroyed 25 competitors in 90 days using psychology, not violence, using fear, not force, using patience, not power. He built a system that outlived him by a century and will outlive us all. And the most terrifying part? He believed he was doing God's work, bringing order to chaos, efficiency to waste, progress to industry. Maybe he was right. Maybe monopoly is the natural endpoint of efficient markets. Or maybe we just accepted his worldview because we live in the system he built and can no longer imagine an alternative. Either way, you now understand the dark psychology behind the Cleveland Massacre. The 90 days that changed American business forever. And you'll never see corporate consolidation the same way again. If this showed you something you've never seen before, if you understand now that the tactics used against small businesses today were perfected 150 years ago, subscribe to this channel. Because understanding the system is the first step. You cannot escape the Rockefeller system, but you can see it, and seeing it changes everything.